Marriage is about love. Divorce is about money. Without the right guidance, critical mistakes can have lasting financial consequences. That is where I come in. My name is Gabriela Martinelli, founder at Ever After Wealth. As a certified divorce financial analyst, I provide my clients financial clarity, strategic divorce planning, and long-term stability. On this podcast, I am sharing what you need to know about getting through a divorce, protecting your legacy, growing your wealth and assets post-divorce, and figuring it out what you really want in this next stage of life. Let's get started. Welcome to the Divorce and Money Podcast. My name is Gabriela Martinelli. I am a certified divorce financial analyst and the founder at Ever After Wealth. Today, I am going to talk about the A word. And no, it's not what you sometimes want to call your soon-to-be ex-spouse, is the word alimony. And I'm going to be giving you my hot takes on the topic. And I want to start with why alimony has such a bad reputation, if you will. Alimony, maintenance, there has different type of, depending on your jurisdiction, probably is a different word, but it's basically the support that a spouse has to pay their ex-spouse for a certain period of time, depending on how their marriage work, right? There's a dependent spouse, there's a supported spouse. But the reality of it is like anyone that hears the word alimony has strong feelings about the word. Most of the time is the spouse that has to pay alimony because they don't feel that they should, because they feel like they work very hard for their money, which is true. And that creates a lot of conflict because when you're going through this process, you add this A word into the mix, and a lot of people just don't even want to have the conversation. On the other side, we have the spouse that could potentially have been a dependent spouse during the marriage, and that is, of course, a legal assumption. The attorney will decide whether this spouse is or is not dependent. But there's a lot of things that come to that, right? Because if you have a very long-term marriage, you have a spouse that maybe left their career. Maybe they were making money. Maybe they had a business. And they decided together as a couple that the one spouse was going to stay home, take care of the kids, take care of the house, and the other spouse was going to go out and work and grow their career, right? And that probably is translated in higher income, higher retirement, and all of the perks that come along with having that career that you dedicated 10, 15, 20 years, right? With the support of your spouse at home. So it's very hard for both sides. The one side feels like absolutely insecure because they don't have an income and they had to go out. They have to go out and try to get a job. If someone has been at home for 10, 15 years, I promise you it's very hard to get a job nowadays. And in a job that is actually comparable on income, that is very hard. It takes a long time. In most of the cases, the spouse cannot reach the same level of income of someone that maybe has been in the corporate world for 15, 20 years. And then this person is just trying to catch up, right? Because it's not just about the time that passed by, the age, the training, the education, and all of the technology, right, that continues to grow. So it becomes a little bit more difficult. On the other side, the person that has to pay the support feels that they don't have to maintain this person because they're not together anymore. So we have, I have clients sometimes that ask me, why do I have to pay? Well, the reality is that you were paying this person. This person didn't have to go to work for 20 years. Now, suddenly, just because you're not with this person doesn't mean that you don't have a financial obligation to help them. I'm not saying you have to support them until they die or forever. However, they need your support in order to get on their feet. On the flip side of this, I always tell my clients that are receiving support that they need to understand that this is just a support to help them get on their feet. There has to be some personal responsibility as well when it comes to supporting yourself, right? And the court is going to require you to do it too. It's not just me. So it's something that you want to consider that, yes, you were in this partnership, but now you're not anymore. So then you have the personal responsibility of maintaining yourself while the other person can help you get on your feet, if you will. So depending which side of the coin you are, right? The spouse that is supposed to pay support, the spouse that is receiving support. If you are on the side that you have to pay support, usually the idea is to pay the least possible money. And if you're in the receiving end, you want to receive as much as possible in support. But the reality of this is like it's not about how anyone feels about this word. It really is about how we calculate support. And some states have a way to do a calculation. There is not a magical formula. There is not a formula of how you calculate this is the income, this is what you're entitled. Some states want a percentage of the income, sometimes the percentage of the income of the supporting spouse. That's what the dependent spouse will receive. Most of the states are just basing this number on income and expenses for both parties, right? So we are going to be talking about what is the income of one party and their expenses, right? Because they also have expenses to pay. They also have responsibility towards themselves. And then we're going to look into the expenses for the supporting spouse and what are their needs when it comes to supporting themselves, right? So let's talk about how we are going to calculate those expenses, okay? How we are going to create a budget in order to come out to this calculation and have a number established for your alimony or support. There's a lot of things that a lot of people go out there and say, oh, my lifestyle, right? You were married for 15, 20 years and you have a lifestyle. So we had to be very clear about this, okay? If you have one income in your home, you had a lifestyle. But when you have to turn this income into two homes, it is impossible to have the same lifestyle. It's just impossible. It can be done. You cannot make more money. The money is the same. So there is going to be changes in your lifestyle. So we can try to accommodate some of those maybe vacations or the traveling or things of that nature that you were doing during your marriage. But we have to be realistic about the fact that it's the same money. And if you are the person receiving the alimony, your spouse also has his own expenses or her own expenses, right? Because they also need to pay a mortgage or a rent and a car insurance, groceries. So we need to also be very clear every time that we come out with this budget that, yes, we can take into consideration the lifestyle, but it is impossible to have the same lifestyle with the same one income when you're living in two separate homes. So I try to be very realistic when I talk to my clients about what this budget looks like. I can do a lifestyle analysis, but I need to also for you to understand, because I have been in podcasts with attorneys and we always talk about when it comes to the calculation of support, a judge is going to look at your reasonable expenses. The judge is not going to look at your lifestyle or what you think it should be because of your lifestyle. They're going to look at what your reasonable expenses are. What reasonable is, nobody knows. So we have to try to be reasonable when we are putting your expenses, right? Your basic needs, for sure. We have to have a home, insurance, car, gas, groceries, etc. Everything else is like a cherry on top. And you may or may not get a support payment that can help you to sustain that life. Because again, you had to be reasonable on your expenses. And honestly, when I work with my clients, and if they're working with an attorney, we create a true on budget. I try not to make any discounts and put everything in there. But the attorneys are going to modify this because they understand how the court will look at it. They know how the law is going to look at it. So you have to be prepared for the fact that, no, you will not be able to potentially spend the same amount of money that you were spending when you were in this marriage. At the same time, if you are on the other side or the one paying, you will have to pay, and your expenses are also going to be reduced. Okay? Again, reasonable expenses. The court is not going to accept that one spouse goes on vacation every year and the other one doesn't. So what they're going to do is just going to reduce those vacations. And yeah, everybody can potentially try to go on vacation, maybe not the same vacations that they were going to, but they're both are going to have similar expenses, if you will, depending on their circumstances, right? Some somebody maybe has to travel for work, or somebody that works needs to spend a little bit more in clothing or in dinners, depending on the work, or if they own a business. The same thing with the spouse, or if you have to go to school, or if you're trying to better yourself so you can get a better job, they're going to take that into consideration. But again, reasonable expenses. And I think there has to be this reality check sometimes that no, the lifestyle you had, it can continue if there's only one income. That is just impossible. The numbers, if you have $4, it's $4 all around. And if you have $4 together, probably have more value. You could do more than now having to divide this 2 and 2. It's just a matter of math. The numbers are the numbers and you can't really change them. So that is something that I always tell my clients, you need to keep that in mind. Reasonable, and it will not be your lifestyle. It's just practically impossible to do. So when we're talking about the reasonable expenses, right, and one of them is the home. And of course, if you're going through a divorce, we don't know where you're going to be when it comes to your house. You may stay in the marital home. You may have to go find a new place, or your spouse may have gone to find a new place. The other part about this is that the judge will want both parties to be on equal ground when it comes to their living, right? Living situation. You cannot have a spouse that goes and lives in one bedroom apartment because they can't afford anything with the kids, and the other spouse is in this penthouse that costs thousands of dollars. So what's going to happen as well is that you have to be very careful. If you're the spouse that is paying the support, and let's say you are separated, you've been separated for a certain period of time, and you decide that your spouse may keep the house and you want to go buy another house, but you have to be very careful because you cannot show up with a budget that has a $5,000 mortgage, right, out of the blue, which is clearly increasing your expenses, which reduces your ability to pay support significantly, potentially. And then the judge to say, well, you clearly are spending way too much money and your spouse is not really in the same equal ground living situation. And this is not forever, right? Again, this is something that is right now while we're going through this process, when we're trying to find a settlement, or when you go to court for a trial, that's what they're going to look like. What happens 5, 10 years down the road, 3 years down the road, you could potentially buy that house, buy that penthouse. It's just something that we're doing while we're going through this process, and you have to be very careful. You can't go out and buy the $100,000 car and have this big car payment now that you didn't have at the time, because any expenses, especially on the person that is paying the support, is going to increase your expenses, which reduces your ability to pay support. So any of those expenses, you have to be very careful. If you change your lifestyle after separation and you start spending a lot of the money, it's not going to be looked at you with a good light, because you're literally increasing your expenses. On the flip side, if you're the person receiving support, I will caution you to be very careful with that too, because I have instances when I'm working with a husband, they own the business, we're looking at the expenses, and it looks like the spouse is spending more money than they did before. So that's where we come back and do this lifestyle analysis. And now it shows that your lifestyle analysis significantly changed and increased your expenses from the marriage, but you are a dependent spouse. So if you are increasing your expenses on purpose or not, maybe it happened naturally, which is okay. Well, you had to be careful, because a judge is not going to look at that in good light either, because now you need more that you would have needed if you have continued maybe your lifestyle. So we had to be careful. And this is why strategy is so important. This is why it's so important when we sit down and look at the numbers, we think ahead about how, in my case, I think about how the attorney is going to look at them, how the judge is going to look at them, and how all those numbers fall up when we look at income, or your income, or the income of your spouse's income, because it's very important that we put a strategy on this. We cannot increase your contributions to a retirement account if you're the spouse that is paying support, because that's literally a voluntary reduction on your income, because you want to save for retirement, which is okay, right? We want to save for retirement, but at the same time, you have a spouse that is not saving for retirement. On the flip side, if we're going to not allow the one spouse to save for retirement for the purpose of a calculation, probably they won't be saving for your retirement on the side of the dependent spouse either. So this is a very long way to say you have got to be strategic. It's not just about your budgets. It's not just about to say, oh, that was my lifestyle. And it's not just about to say they can go get a job because they are smart. There is a balance, there's a strategy, and you have to prepare yourself for either pay some support or receive some support. But you cannot count on that to be just your livelihood for the rest of your life, because more likely it will not be. And again, it depends every circumstances, every case is different. That's why the strategy is so important here. As minimum as your budget, it seems very simple. It's not as simple. Nobody really understands how much money they spend a month. So when I work with my clients, we take care of calculating the budget, understanding expenses, and see whether some things should not really be spending on. But you have to be very careful, very detailed, and above everything, you have to be strategic about how you go to maneuver these numbers. So I want to speak directly to those that are the dependent spouse, legally dependent spouse, that the attorney considers that you're a dependent spouse and you're receiving, or you will receive, alimony or support from your ex-spouse. I think it's very important that you have a solid understanding of your budget and the fact that you have personal responsibility to support yourself. I understand, and I'm not minimizing the fact that probably you are the spouse that stay home. You were the parent that take care of the kids. You allow your spouse to grow a business, a medical practice, or go up the corporate ladder, and you help create that wealth for them. I'm not minimizing that. However, the reality of this is like you're not in that partnership anymore, and you have personal responsibility towards yourself. I speak all the time about the fact that individuals should be financially independent from another individual, because if you're financially independent, you are able to make choices. You are able to stay or go. You're able to buy or not buy. You're able to change your life. You're able to move. You're able to do everything you want to do without depending on someone else, because you have that power to choose. And the choice comes from financial independence. I know money is not all in life, but money gives you independence and the ability to make your own choices. So it's very important that you understand that more likely that support will not be forever. More likely it will not be as much as you want to believe that you will receive. And more so, it's not going to be as much as your friends are telling you should be getting. It's not going to be as much as the individuals on Facebook are telling you that you will receive. Probably won't be nothing like that. So it's very important that we have these conversations about your budget, your spending, and how are you planning to become financially independent, because you deserve it, but you also own it to yourself to be financially independent. And society will require you to be financially independent. A judge will actually expect you to be taking the steps to be financially independent. So I think that is something that you need to think about, your personal responsibility. Now, I'm not going to leave the ones paying support off the hook here. So if you are the individual that was in a very long-term marriage and supported your spouse and the family from a financial point of view, and you went out there and you grew your business and you grew your medical practice, or you are now up in the corporate ladder, which it gives you a lot of benefits and financial benefits especially, you have to remember the sacrifices that spouse made when they were at home. They took care of your children, they take care of you, they take care of the account, they help you. They were your partner in this. So it's very important for you to understand that they don't deserve to be maintained forever. You don't have to support them forever. It's important to come out to a true number. We don't want to trick your income or your expenses to try to pay them the least possible, because in reality, the sooner they can get on their feet, the more that you can help them get on their feet, the sooner that responsibility will end. But it's important that we take into consideration those sacrifices from the other spouse. And the law has a place for that, right? It's saying, well, the stay-at-home spouse, if they were not making money, they're entitled to some support. Again, it's not forever. The laws are changing everywhere. Like the requirements for support are changing everywhere. But I think it's important to recognize that everything that you have done, if you were not the stay-at-home spouse, is probably because there was a spouse at home. So you will have to pay something. And the sooner that we can assume that that's going to happen, the better, because we can start making the right calculations so we can come out to that number where it's going to allow them to get on their feet and go, and you to go back to planning your life without having to pay that money after a certain period of time, depending on the situation. But I think we need to be very clear on both sides that there's reasons why support alimony is there, and is not just because someone one day arbitrarily said, oh, we're going to let the spouse have to pay for the expenses of the other spouse. No, it's because there was a dedication on one way or another. Somebody dedicated their life to grow their wealth and support their family. The other one supported the family different ways. So we just had to come to the table understanding that it's not forever, and it's not be as much as we want. It's not going to be as little as we want to pay. There will be something in the middle. It will be reasonable, and it's going to help both parties to move forward from this process and achieve their goals as they move forward. But you still need to support each other somehow, somewhat, while you're going through this process of splitting up your partnership. So at the end of the day, you have to understand that even though you're, like I said, you are terminating this partnership and you're going through this process to split your assets and the marital estate and deciding on the support and things of that nature, it's very important that we take into consideration the words that we use for this, right? For example, he or she doesn't deserve for me to pay them, or I want them to pay me as much as possible because they have an obligation to support me because of what I did my whole life. I think both sides of the coin are valid sides, but the problem here is that it's not black and white. It's going to depend on what we consider reasonable expenses. It's going to depend on what the income is. Again, we can multiply or make more of what we have. So we had to be very open to understanding that we can do the best we can, but there's going to be restrictions. There is almost sometimes considered a moral obligation. They have to support me, or the spouse is like, oh, they don't deserve it for what they did to me. Well, unfortunately, the law doesn't agree with that, right? And there's going to be some responsibility towards this individual that allows you to grow your business, or this individual that allow you to grow your practice and or have a high-end corporate job. And on the flip side, yes, they have a responsibility, but that doesn't mean they have to go broke because you want to try to maintain a lifestyle that is impossible to maintain because of the money. So I feel like the most important part of this is like be very reasonable when you're working on what the income, what the expenses are, and also understanding that that person that you're breaking this partnership with, you may have a relationship with them for the rest of your life. You have kids. They may be young kids. They may have older kids. If they're older kids, they're going to be maybe marriages, maybe grandchildren. There will be some events where the family will be together. And I think the words that we use during this process is going to affect the rest of the relationship. The divorce process will have a lot to do how you maintain relationships with your ex-spouse afterwards. And family and kids are very important. So I'll just caution you not to use those words that are hurtful, because they are going to be received in an emotional way. Divorce is emotional. Divorce is not about, is about the money. My thought is divorce is about the money, but we cannot forget the emotions that are attached to this. So it's very important that we understand that there is a little bit of right on both sides of this coin. They're both true statements, if you will, but at the same time, they are not absolute statements. And we need to be making sure that we use the right words and we strategize. You got to strategize the numbers. And for that, we need to sometimes let go a little bit of that emotion that we attach to the numbers, because the numbers don't have emotions and they are absolute. So I will just recommend that we look at this from the math perspective. What is reasonable, not hiding income, making the true calculations, add a strategy to your plan, and what is that you want to see happening for your life? next, because that number probably will have a lot to do. It's like, what is that you want as you move forward in this process? That is going to help you understand what you need. If you don't know what you want, you don't know what you need. So I think that is something that we also need to take into consideration. As I always say, while you're going through this process, forget about what they say, what they want, and answer what is that you want. Thank you again for being with me today. I hope that this was helpful. Share it with anyone that you think may need it, that is going through the process or may be considering going through the process. Do not keep me a secret, and I'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you're going through a separation or divorce, please contact me through my website at everafterwealth.com. I would love to be a resource and partner as you navigate this season and prepare for your financial future. I'll see you in the next episode.